Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome back to Life Simplified. This is Tiffany, your host for the day. This month, we've been picking an University of Kentucky Extension Health Bulletin to guide our discussions. And so our topics are a little all over the place this month. If you've been listening, you'll notice that we are not really on a theme like maybe we have in past months, but they are all focused on different health-related topics. So today we'll be discussing the April 2020, so we're throwing it back several years, Family Caregiver Health Bulletin that focuses on millennial caregivers. And let me just say, when I was looking for a topic, I was going through our health bulletins. I was like, what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about? And this came up, this millennial caregiver. And I was like, what is this about? It's a little bit older. It's from right as the world was kind of going, what is COVID? Because April 2020, I think we were all probably kind of like, what is happening? But if you joined us last month, we talked about all things generations. And so I thought it was interesting that this was a generational focused caregiving health bulletin because that's not something I really anticipated seeing. But as I dug in a little bit, I think we all have either been a caregiver or we know someone who's a caregiver. And the world is changing a lot. And our everyday normal has changed a lot. And that is affecting caregiving as well. And so just looking at some of the different trends, some of the things that we're expecting, 3 of the 4 of us are millennials. One of us is a Gen X. This is really our topic. We're living this right now, and I know that probably a lot of our listeners are too, or you have a family member, friend, coworker who is living this. So I thought it was pretty relevant and something worth looking at because we've not really talked about caregivers in the past, and there are lots of resources for this. So let me just tell you, if you are interested, there are lots of health bulletins that dig in different topics. But before I start sharing from the bulletin itself, ladies, do you consider yourself to be a caregiver?
Well, since I am the Gen X in this group, I will say yes. Because even though my parents still are able to do things for themselves, I still have to help them. Either going to doctor's appointments or, just things that they may not be able to do now that I need to do for them. And so, am I a full-time caregiver? No, but I am still a caregiver to some degree. And also, I have been for my brother as well. So, yes, I have been a caregiver.
I would say I'm a caregiver in the sense of I am raising a child, but when I think of a caregiver, and I don't know if we're going to talk about both aspects, raising a child and caring for parents or older adults. But as far as that aspect, caring for other adults, no, I do not see myself as a caregiver.
Yeah, same. I don't see myself as a caregiver for my parents. I'm on the younger end, I guess, of a millennial. So I see my parents being caregivers more, especially over the past few years. And I find myself saying, hey, when you get this old, remember these things.
Yes.
When they're giving them a hard time or no, I'm not doing that. Those things. I'm like, remember this because I'm going to be saying this to you. So make my life a little bit easier. But I'm personally not in this area.
Yeah.
And I also, far as when my mother-in-law got sick, my husband has 3 older sisters, but between us 4, we kept her in the home. And so we all 3 shared of being a caregiver to her. So that's another aspect for myself that I look at.
Yes. All of you had great points. And so I think we're right on track. First of all, like, I want to address what Joni said about, yes, you're a caregiver. You're taking to doctor's appointments. You're helping do things, but you don't consider yourself to be a full-time caregiver, meaning that's not what you're doing all the time. They are still able to do things for themselves, but you're kind of bridging the gap. And I think in the research, that's one of the big things with younger family caregivers is sometimes we become caregivers before we realize or we acknowledge ourselves that we are caregivers, because we're just kind of doing what family does. I think is kind of what comes to mind for us. Well, that's just what we do. We help our parents, we help our siblings, we help our aunts and uncles, our in-laws, or whoever it is that are our people, and we don't define ourselves as a caregiver when maybe in reality we truly are. And so I think that's good that you recognize that you are, and it may not be like to the depth that it was with your mother-in-law yet, but you're still a caregiver. You're still there helping out your brother and your parents when they need someone to be there and help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't consider myself a caregiver, but if you really get down to the terms of it, I am, know. But, it's just one of them things. I do it because we are family. And my parents are older. My mother's in her 80s. My dad's in the late 70s. So, I mean, they're not spring chickens anymore, the things that need to be done. So, I have to step in, or my sister does. So, we split that responsibility as well. But we do it because we love our parents and we love our family. So, we just got to do what we got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going to what Ashley said, no, I'm not really an adult family member or caregiver, but I have children that I'm caring for. When we think family caregiver, we are thinking more of like an adult or someone that's not our child. But the fact that we are raising children, while a lot of times in this generation also helping caregive for another family member, it can kind of compound that. And that's one of the things in the research too. Like it's unique because as caregivers are beginning to caregive at a younger age, they still have a lot of other responsibilities in their own household that they're also trying to maintain and manage. And that can add a different level of maybe stress or overwhelm there. So that's a good point to point out for our listeners too. I will say, I don't think I even answered the question. I do not currently consider myself a caregiver of a family member. On occasion, I think there have been instances where I have done things that would be in the caregiver category, but I'm not really there yet. Although I can see, like, as my parents get a little bit older, like sometimes I'll be like, are you sure you should do that? Maybe you need to reconsider that. I start feeling myself like wanting to parent them a little bit more, and they probably don't appreciate that. But I think it's just kind of a natural transition. But I can see how in the years to come that probably is going to be a role that I will step into. And particularly with my sister not living here, I know that role will kind of fall to me because I will be more local and easier to access. So if you aren't a caregiver, you probably know someone who is a caregiver. Like Amanda said, you're not a caregiver yet, but you're watching your parents be a caregiver. And I've watched my parents be caregivers. And so it's something we can all relate to. And I think it's one of those things that if you're not one, you probably will be at one point in your life. In some capacity, you will be a caregiver to a family member more than likely. Getting into the health bulletin, and remember, like I said, this was April 2020, and so I'm going to give you some statistics. I know they have probably changed, but it kind of lays a little groundwork for you to see where we're at, and knowing that this isn't the full picture, but we're getting there. So there was an AARP study on millennials, and it was called the Emerging Generation of Family Caregivers. And some of the things they found were that 73% of millennial caregivers work while also spending 21 hours per week on caregiving tasks. So kind of like we were talking about, as a younger caregiver, you're working full time, you're maybe caring for your children still in the home, and dedicating a significant amount of time to also caring for a family member. And so that's a lot. Like, that's taking on a part-time job. If you want to look at the hours, 21 hours a week, that's significant. And I would imagine that's probably the average. Some are doing much more, maybe some are doing a little bit less. Also, this is a big one, and I think so important for us to keep in mind, is millennials keep more to themselves than the older caregivers. And so why this is important is because if you're a younger caregiver and you tend to keep it more to yourself, that is going to be really hard for you to self-care and to de-stress and to cope, because there's not really anybody there to lift the burden and to encourage you. So if that's you, awareness of that can be really, really important. And if it's not you, but you have a friend or a family member who's a caregiver and you know that this is kind of them, man, we have to really, and I'm speaking to myself here, we got to step up and we got to check in on our people because they're struggling, but they're not sharing it. And I'll be real honest, when I picked this topic, I was like, I don't know, is anybody going to want to hear this? But I think it's so relevant. And I had validation because I was actually just with a friend the other day. We don't get to talk alone often, but she opened up about some things going on in this caregiving realm and, you know, how alone and overwhelming and just kind of defeating it can feel at times. And we had a really good heart to heart. And it reminded me, like, we need to discuss these things. We need to remind each other that if it's me, it's okay for me to open up and ask for help. And if it's not me, but it's my friend or it's my family member, or it's my coworker or my whoever, I need to step up and be there for them, to recognize what they're going through when maybe they're not the ones that are speaking up. So this is important to note. Like, the younger caregivers, they're keeping to themselves more than the older caregivers, more than our parents probably would do. So we need to be more aware of that and reach out as best we can.
Another way that you can also consider being a caregiver, I have a family member that takes care of a special needs child.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
And that's another big role as somebody is, you know, being a caregiver to their child that cannot take care of themselves, or even a sibling as well, you know. So that's something else that we can think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if there's other children in the house and maybe they also have aging parents, and there's just so many layers going on there. That's a good point.
When you were talking about millennials keeping to themselves and holding it in, I can definitely see that. I could see myself doing that someday. And when my husband had his surgery, I was a caregiver for a very short amount of time, and I didn't tell anyone how hard that was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some people knew. You ladies probably knew, but I can so see that happening, and that it's a very important conversation to have.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Sometimes we find ourselves being temporary caregivers if we have a family member or friend who has had a surgery. And even though that may be a shorter amount of time, maybe you don't foresee it, you know, lasting, it still is impactful. And it's still good to check in with each other, and also check in if you're the one in that situation. So that's a good point. And I hope you know, like, yes, your person you're caring for is going through something, but you are too. And you are worthy of sharing your emotions as well. 100%. So the next thing they found is not only do they keep to themselves, but less than half of millennial caregivers even talk to their bosses about their situation. So they're not even sharing with their manager or their coworkers what's going on, so that those people can be more aware and maybe work a more flexible schedule. There may be some things that can happen at your job to make it a little bit easier in the caregiving realm. But when we don't even share that that's something we're dealing with, then there's no opportunity to see what the options are. We got to do better, guys. I know I'm one of us. So we got to do better. 54% report that their work or career has been negatively affected by caregiving responsibilities.
That's a lot.
That's, I mean, well over half. And I think it makes sense, because even like in just the caregiving situations that those of us in our room have been in, I think we would vouch that it does. It affects our work. It affects our ability to focus. It affects our ability to do our best, or, you know, just even like the scatterbrainness when you have so many things going on. You're trying to do all the things for all the people. It makes it hard. And so it's a stress that's affecting us all the way around, but we're not talking about it, and we're not sharing it with our coworkers or our bosses. And so Yeah, this is important information. The next one is millennials balance the financial pressure of repaying student debt and spending income on caregiving. So we're talking like work impacts, relationship impacts, emotional impacts, financial impacts. It's hitting all of the areas. And I mean, it makes sense because how many Gen Xers, millennials are paying off student loans and debt, and it's rough. And the economy, there's been some struggles. And then you're also trying to care for people you love, and you want to feed them and make sure that they have air conditioning and the heat and make sure that they have the things that they need. And it's a lot. Millennials spend their own money for care-related tasks, including transportation, home modification, food, and medication. So not even thinking like, oh, I'm moving someone in my house. That may not be the case, but like just transportation. Just getting to and from appointments, that's a burden that can cause stress. Home modifications, that's one we don't always think about, but if there's something going on and you need to make sure your house works for your family member, that can take time and effort and definitely money. And then the last one from this study is millennials are almost twice as likely as older caregivers to provide support for people with emotional or mental health issues. And y'all, I'm telling you, first of all, I don't think we're shocked by that, but it's not something that we necessarily think about, how the caregiving realm is changing, because we typically think about, okay, I'm caring for someone who has a physical ailment or disability or someone who's just aging, and that's what's happening. But we are seeing more and more mental health and emotional issues emerging and being diagnosed. And so now that is adding another layer to caregiving that a lot of us don't even feel like we're prepared or able to handle. And so that can also be something like we think about the age of someone. Mental health concerns and issues can happen at any point, any age, any life stage. And so you could be in college and find yourself being a caregiver. You could be at any stage of your life and all of a sudden you're trying to care for someone that's really facing something that you yourself may not understand, or you yourself may be facing as well. I don't know. Had you all thought about this? I feel like I should have. I feel like it should have occurred to me because mental health is my realm. But I don't know that when we think about caregiving that we realize that this is making an impact. And remember, guys, this was April 2020 that this came out. So it was written pre-COVID. I can only imagine the impacts in all of these areas, financially, emotionally, mental health, all of the things now after people have gone through that. Like, I would only think that it has probably increased. I think it's good for us to have awareness of all of these things so that we can really see each other and we can understand ourselves better as well. In the health bulletin, it goes on to share some of the unique challenges because we see all these numbers, we see all these statistics, we have the information, but what does that mean? And so, the first one is delaying the future. When you think about a younger caregiver, delaying the future, there are lots of different things that could be put on hold in order to care for a family member or loved one. Some of them just like maybe you delay starting your career path. Maybe you delay getting into a relationship or getting married or having children or buying a house or doing all of the things that typically within this stage of life you think about doing, but that then has to be kind of put off for another time so that you can focus in on caring for a family member. So there can definitely be a delay to future milestones or events. Coping with academic pressure. So we know that it says it's impacting work, but a lot of these millennials, Gen Xers, are still in school, still trying to get a degree or getting another degree or furthering their education, and the academic pressures of trying to study and get through classes and internships and practicums, but also caring for someone and trying to meet the needs of that financial burden too. So maybe I'm working, I'm studying, I'm doing all of the things. And so that can be a challenge. This one I think is huge, is that spending less time with friends or social isolation. And so we know it said we're not sharing this very well with our peers or our coworkers or our friends or any of the people. And so I would say, yes, it can be very isolating because I don't want to dump my burdens on someone else. I don't want to, share everything that's going on because maybe it feels more private and I feel like I'm breaking my loved one's confidentiality. I did read another article, and some of the things mentioned were that when you're a younger caregiver and your peers and friends are not necessarily there yet, it feels isolating anyways. And that some of them shared that, your friends might be talking about normal stressors that you face in this stage of life. And so then you're like, gosh, I feel even more alone because while, I can see that stressful for them, they have no idea this other thing that I'm carrying, this other load and weight that's on me. And so it's easier to just not be around other people because then they don't have to know, or I don't have to feel like I don't fit in or I'm not in the same space. And so being aware of that and knowing that we need people more than ever when we're in this point, but we're isolating, that's where, again, like I think us as friends and coworkers and family need to try really hard to be more socially aware of the people we're around so that we can maybe pick up the slack when they are at a place that they don't feel like they can share. We can just give the little nudge or the little encouragement or the little whatever it is to let them know, like, we come back into our circle, come back and like, we may not understand, but we're going to love on you anyways. And we're going to try to understand, and we're going to meet the needs the best we can because we need people.
It's like Ashley said earlier, about her husband having surgery, and it was a struggle, and but she didn't want to talk about it, and I think that's a lot of people that have ever been in that row because we don't want to seem it's a burden. Well, they're going through so much. Well, I'm going through so much too, but you don't want to bring attention to yourself. So we just kind of take that and hold on to it and don't share. So if you know somebody for sure that is going through this, just check on them. Give them a text. Give them a phone call. Because like you said a while ago, a lot of times, they're not going to say. I know I didn't, when things was really struggling hard with my mother-in-law and her illness, I just dealt with it and go on because I didn't want to bring anything towards me. So.
Yeah. And I hate it that someone who's caring for someone else feels like it would be a burden for someone to care about them. But we do. And I don't know if if it's generational. I don't know if that's just a caregiver's natural inclination that I care for others, but that's just what I do. And like, maybe I'll be fine. I don't need that, but we're not fine when we're alone and we're overwhelmed and we're stressed and we feel like a burden to each other. We're not. People care so much. I think our biggest problem is we don't know what to do.
I was very thankful. I'll be honest with you. I was very thankful that they allowed me to be in that row with them as well, since it was my mother-in-law, so I'm not trying to complain with any of that. I guess is the way you feel, because I was thankful that they allowed me to be able to be in that row. But, in the same time, there was a lot going on in my personal life. Like I had just switched jobs. I had other things. And it's like nobody knew, because I didn't let anybody know. I just dealt with it and go on. But sometimes we need that support from other people. So,
yes. And I think that's a good point too. Like the emotional range is significant as a caregiver because you are grateful that you are able to be there for that person you care about. So it's not necessarily like I'm mad at this person or I'm frustrated with this person, but it is also a heavy task. And so it's really vital to have people there for you. And I think like the next thing is the managing self-care. And that's for all caregivers. I don't care what age you are. But self-care kind of really gets pushed aside when you're caring for other people. I think we do it as parents when we're caring for our kids, but I think it's a different level when you are then caring for another adult and another family member. And so, it says it can be a challenge to even take 10 minutes for me time. And when you think about that, like we've all felt that. Like, I don't even have time. Like, we've probably said, I don't even have time to go to the bathroom. Like, I have no time. I can't. Like, I've just got to keep going, pushing. Like, I don't even know if I'm sleeping. But 10 minutes can make such a huge impact. And we can find 10 minutes. We can find 10 minutes to just kind of breathe. Because sometimes we're not even breathing. We're just going through the motions. So managing self-care, it's a challenge, but it's also imperative when we're caregiving. How do we help? There's so many things, and not necessarily any of them are easy, but they're all important and helpful. And so helping millennial caregivers, or any caregiver, or younger caregivers, all the people, first of all, encouraging them to talk about their situation. We've already established they don't want to talk about it, but they need to talk about it. And it doesn't have to be to me or you or anybody else. They can talk to whoever they feel safe with, but just encouraging our people to talk to people, to get it out of your head, because sometimes we just need it to lose a little power. And when it's in our head, we spin our wheels and we usually go places we don't need to be. So it's better to get it out and get some perspective and have someone who understands what's happening and at least knows to check in on us, because that's important.
Well, and I think even if you are the person that they're talking to, letting them know that they're not complaining. I mean, Joni literally just said, I'm not complaining. And we know you're not complaining. We know that you are an excellent caregiver. I know this. And we know that, but you still felt, I need to say I'm not complaining. And I would be the exact same way too. So that's what I'm saying. Like, giving them the
permission.
Thank you. Yes. Permission to feel the things and to say the things and vent it out, because sometimes that's just what we need to do. And we don't want to seem like we're complaining. So yes, giving them the permission to say the things in a judgment-free zone.
Yeah. It's okay to not be okay. It really is. We've all been there. We're all going to experience it. And that's why we have each other. That's why relationships are vital, because we pick up the slack when someone is struggling. And it's just part of being a human. Some days you're just not okay, and it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to share that. Another thing that they mentioned for helping millennial caregivers or younger caregivers is family and friends can share kind words. So, when family and friends know what's going on, then they're able to encourage, to offer understanding. And even more than that, they can help. They can offer help. They can come alongside you and let you know you don't have to do this alone. And it says in here, like, maybe volunteer an hour or two of time to provide respite. And I think, what better way to show somebody, like, I care for you and I see you is, sometimes we don't know what to do. Well, if my friend is caring for someone and they're burnt out and they're tired and they're stressed and they're overwhelmed and they just need to breathe, like, how hard is it to say, I will sit with your person so you can go to the spa, so you can go to the movie, so you can go sit in your room and take a nap, whatever it is. That's a real life thing we can do to easily just kind of lift them back up and let them get some rest and be able to move forward. Because sometimes that's all it takes. We just need someone to say, I got dinner, I got the laundry, I got this, whatever that is. That sometimes that task that is not necessarily that hard, but it feels insurmountable because we're just so tired and we're so overwhelmed. Just being able to do those things, that's huge. And then this one I thought was really interesting, but I like that it's in here. It says, it's also important to recognize a young person's right to be young and to do what young people need or want to do. And I think we don't think about that, but when it's a younger caregiver, and when I say younger, you could 40s, 30s, 20s, whatever, you're a younger caregiver. I don't that's fine. You should be able to do what someone in your age group does. And so you shouldn't feel guilty if you want to go out on a date night or a girls' night, or if you want to go to the movies, or if you want to do things that people in your age group do. That should be okay. We should be able to recognize that and encourage them to do that, and maybe come alongside them and help them out so that is something they're able to do, but not putting pressure on, like, why are you not taking care of so-and-so? Nobody needs that. Nobody needs to be shoulded. Like we do that enough to ourselves. We put enough pressure on ourselves. No one else has to do that. So letting the younger caregivers still be their own person, not being completely defined by being a caregiver. One other thing that I found, and I can't vouch for if they're great or not great or whatever, but I think it's something worth looking to. And when I was reading an article, there is a Facebook support group that is specifically for Gen X and Millennial caregivers, and it's called Caregiver Collective. And it's a private group, like you can ask to join it. And so the whole purpose is just to have like this social media place that you can go where everyone is kind of feeling the same things and can express like, this is what's worked for me, or let me just support you, or let's talk about what's helping and not helping. And I think it's cool because, of course, like, social media makes sense. Facebook is kind of the place to go for these generations. And so I looked at it, and I didn't join it because I don't feel like I'm there yet. But they do have lots of members, and they are very specific in who they let in. You could tell that they are really protective of each other because they were like specifically mentioned, like, if you are someone like that's a journalist or within the media and you're trying to gather information for an article or a story or whatever, like, we're not going to add you. You don't get to come here because this is a safe space. But if you have questions that you want, we will ask and we'll give you information because we love that you're advocating for this group. But we want this to be a safe space where people don't feel like the things they're sharing are about to come out in a news article or a news report. So I don't know. I'm not in this group, but it may be something you can look into if that's somewhere you are in your life and you feel like it might be a place that you can find support from people who are experiencing similar life events. Now, there's all kinds of health bulletins on caregiving. Matter of fact, every month there's one that's specific to family caregivers, and so that it touches on a variety of topics from self-care to sleep to helping the person that you're caregiving for. So if you find yourself there, this is a great resource. And so we will link the ones we're using, but you feel free to go find them. And if you can't call any extension office in the state of Kentucky and someone will help you get those resources. And they're not long. They're literally like a 1-page newsletter front and back, but they're a good jumping off point for some ideas. And then you can dig deeper and do your own research from there. But I think this topic is different, but it's something worth talking about. And I think if we don't get anything else out of this today, it's that know that it's okay to share if you're in this place and to reach out and let people know what you're going through. And if you're not in this place yet, pay attention to the people around you that are here and just try and be aware of things that you can do to lighten their load, because it's a lot and we're all going to find ourselves there at some point. And so helping each other out is probably the very best thing that we can do as a caregiver and for a caregiver. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you found this enlightening and helpful and maybe even encouraging, I hope. But we also enjoy any feedback that you would like to give us. If you would like to follow us on our Facebook or Instagram pages, you can find us at Life Simplified Podcast. And we always encourage you to reach out to us and send us any suggestions or feedback on our email at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.